For the past century, Russian history has also been the history of its security services. They were used by the Soviet state to crush dissent. Millions suffered at their hands. But while many things may have changed in today's Russia, its security network is arguably stronger than ever. And the reason behind that is the rise of a lowly lieutenant colonel to president of this vast country.
I know the KGB better than anyone else because I was part of the inside circle.
This is the story of the KGB, told by its veterans and its victims.
Беседуют сотрудники CIC, английской разведки, ЦРУ и КГБ. Сотрудник CIC говорит: у нас в работе соблюдается очень строгая секретность. То, чем я занимаюсь, знаю только я, мой начальник и сотрудники моего отдела. ЦРУ сотрудник говорит: слушайте, у нас соблюдается еще более все строго и серьезно. О том, чем я занимаюсь, знаю только я и мой начальник. Наш говорит: слушайте, это все не то. Вот у нас настоящая секретность. О том, чем я занимаюсь, даже я не знаю.
Such harmless jokes, told openly in a Moscow comedy club today, had to be shared very privately during the most repressive days of the Soviet Union.
People were really afraid that someone might be listening in or watching, and it wasn't just paranoia. Their fears were justified.
But the Soviets were projecting a very different image through their propaganda. Workers were shown striving together for common good.
Однако еще предстоит большая работа, чтобы осуществить задачу догнать Соединенные Штаты Америки по производству продуктов животноводства на душу населения.
In the 1920s and 30s, this view of a utopian society also inspired communists in the West. Some were even willing to collaborate with the Soviets against their own governments.
The NKVD was first class at mobilizing all its resources. They used a variety of inducements, not just money. You could also convince communists to pass material to the Soviet Union.
Nowhere would prove more important to Soviet intelligence than a leafy English university town just 80 kilometers north of the capital, London.
When the KGB looked at Cambridge, I don't think they could believe their luck. It was a very small establishment where a very small number of people were educated for all of the highest positions in British government.
It was here, amongst what largely represented the arrogant elite of the English class system, that the Soviets recruited the most notorious spy ring in history, the Cambridge Five.
This small group of people were highly corruptible, highly recruitable. Many of them were communists. Many of them had all kinds of vices which could be worked upon and used against them in forms of blackmail. Most of them were very eager as well to work for the Soviets. They don't see at this moment in time that they're lending help to a monstrous superpower. They see themselves as helping out a plucky, small socialist state which is surrounded by enemies.
From 1940, these 5 Cambridge spies began to leak details of an American project to build a superweapon. Something so powerful that it would rock the world's military equilibrium. So when America detonated the world's first atomic bomb, Stalin didn't flinch. KGB spies were already supplying intelligence, ensuring the Soviets would have their own bomb in the shortest possible time.
There was a decision by Stalin to concentrate on the atomic project. And then there was this, the plan we made, Enormous, it was called.
Operation Enormous was run by Stalin's security chief, Lavrenti Beria.
Beria was important because he understood what kind of information was needed. They could see that the American bomb worked, and that's why they quickly decided to do it the American way. They already had so much material that they just had to reverse engineer it.
Soon after the war, the Soviets accelerated their own nuclear program. The job of reverse engineering fell to physicist Igor Kurchatov. Each evening, Kurchatov would go to an office at the Lubyanka to study papers gathered by spies in the West. A team of secretaries transcribed and translated each new revelation. Hard technical data was now supplied by scientist Klaus Fuchs, a communist who had fled Nazi Germany in 1933. He was a key contributor to the American bomb program, the Manhattan Project.
Klaus Fuchs was committed to helping the Soviets get the bomb, more in many ways out of a sense of fairness than out of a sense of loyalty to the Soviet state. He didn't believe that this was a weapon that should be possessed by the West alone.
In August 1949, 3 trains raced across the Soviet Union towards the Kazakh steppes, where the first test was planned. One carried scientists and security personnel, including Lavrenti Beria. Another carried soldiers. And the last carried an atomic bomb, almost an exact replica of the American bomb which had destroyed Nagasaki.
In the bunker in Kazakhstan, while Beria and the scientists are waiting for the bomb to explode, the scientists are nervously asking, what will happen if this doesn't work? And Beria jokes, "You'll all be shot." They weren't quite clear whether he was joking or not. They may well have been shot. More likely, they would have ended up in a Gulag and be working still on the atomic program.
The glory of the Soviet Union now rested on one moment. It was 29th of August, 1949. When the news broke, the West was in shock. The question reverberated around the world. How could they have caught up so quickly?
Please, does Russia have the atomic bomb?
And even today, disputes remain as to whether it was the scientists or the spies who played the major part.
There was a debate between spies and atomic scientists about who made the bigger contribution. There's no need to play down either role. It was our Soviet spies and scientists working together that made it happen.
Though Russian scientists would go on to develop their own nuclear weapons, it was the NKVD's spy network that first delivered the Soviet Union superpower status.
Those agents in the USA, Klaus Fuchs, foreigners, that's the power of Soviet intelligence.
Fuchs was always revered by the KGB. These unique pictures were taken in a Berlin cemetery by the East German secret police in the 1980s. They show one of the KGB's top spy masters, Alexander Feklisov, honoring the grave of the spy he ran, whom he still regarded as one of the Soviet Union's greatest heroes. Foreign spies had put Russia on a par with the United States, Stalin's highest ambition.
Stalin believed, first of all, that the Soviet Union had to be feared, it had to be powerful. After that, he could focus on building houses and raising the standard of living.
Military spending soared, while across the country there were shortages of almost everything. But the Russians could turn even nuclear war into a joke about life's struggle as a Soviet citizen.
На заседании Политбюро обсуждается вопрос о немедленном завоевании капиталистического мира. Берия предлагает: у нас есть 12 атомных бомб. Надо запаковать их в чемоданы, разослать по главным столицам мира и одновременно взорвать. А Микоян протестует: план товарища Берия несуществим. У нас нет столько хороших чемоданов.
Operation Enormous was a great success for NKVD chief Lavrentiy Beria. A handful of well-placed agents had transformed the Soviet Union into a superpower. When Stalin died in 1953, it seemed likely that his successor would be Lavrentiy Beria. Under his stewardship, the intelligence service had helped transform the Soviet Union into a nation powerful enough to rival the American military might.
Дорогие товарищи и друзья, трудно выразить словами чувство великой скорби, которые переживают в эти дни.
Every bit the leader, Beria addressed the crowds at Stalin's funeral. But he hadn't reckoned with the ambition of the man on his left, Nikita Khrushchev, another high-ranking party official.
When Stalin died, Beria thought that he would be the leader, but Khrushchev outmaneuvered him.
Within weeks, Khrushchev mounted a coup and assumed power, much to Beria's surprise.
He thought that Khrushchev was a Ukrainian simpleton, only concerned with party matters. Beria thought, I have all the power, and I don't think he saw him as an opponent.
Beria was unaware that Khrushchev had garnered the support of the army, the only force more powerful than his own. It was a fatal oversight. Khrushchev had him arrested on charges of working for the enemy. What happened next remains a mystery.
The official version then is that Beria is put on trial and executed. One of the strange things about this is that there are no official arrest photos of Beria in the archives that we've seen. So we have the word of Khrushchev to take for it that Beria is put on trial in December of 1953 and executed then.
One way or another, Beria was now gone. Khrushchev's next move was to reduce the power of the security services at home, reining in its powers of suppression.
Every department was cut back. This was Khrushchev's attempt to curb this super agency.
64,000 workers were sacked from state security. They were ridiculed and humiliated. They called them Beria's dogs and things like that. You can imagine how it weakened our organization.
For those loyal servants inside the KGB, Khrushchev was a traitor.
I can't see Khrushchev's work in any other way. My conscience, my inner core and experience as a KGB officer won't allow it.
For others, it was the welcome arrival of a leader who appeared to believe in greater freedom.
He had something humane about him. He would have been a good man if he hadn't been spoiled by communist propaganda. All those Marxes and Engelses and all that rubbish.
Khrushchev set out to reposition the Communist Party as the true defender of the people.
Khrushchev saw no point in punishing everyone with anti-Soviet views. That's why the number of arrests was lower than under Stalin. But the KGB wasn't humane because it was the instrument of repression in the fight against dissent.
Despite orders from the top to show more leniency towards political dissent, the security forces soon found other, more discreet ways to punish prisoners.
They invented another way of torturing people. These were the so-called soft cells, where the abuse of the prisoners became more sophisticated. A man would be walked into a cell like this, and the guards would grab him by the arms and legs and throw him against the walls. The victim had no visible signs of physical abuse, but the internal organs were damaged.
Both these men served time here for anti-Soviet activities, but they had very different experiences. Ivan Mamchur was here under Stalin and then Khrushchev. Zorian Popodyuk was here 30 years later.
I heard that when Ivan was here, there were no beds, nothing. We had beds like this, 3 to a cell, number 55.
I was deprived of sleep. In the daytime, I would sit in the corner. Warders would bang on the doors with their keys and shout, "No sleeping, no sleeping, no sleeping."
The prison system was less draconian when Zorian Popodyuk was here, but intimidation was still routine.
When the KGB officers came to conduct interrogations, I immediately saw their extreme brutality. They wanted to frighten me.
As if prison life here wasn't terrifying enough, Mamchur was sent to the Kengir prison camp in Kazakhstan. In 1954, prompted by Stalin and Beria's death the previous year, and the promise of reform under Khrushchev, inmates here and at other camps began to demand their basic rights.
One day, on the 15th of May, we said, "Enough. We won't work anymore." We didn't ask for much. We just wanted them to remove our number badges, remove the bars from the windows and doors, and take away the slop buckets.
When these simple requests were rejected, the prisoners took over the camp. After 40 days, Moscow finally sent in tanks and soldiers.
We heard noise, shouting, and machine gun fire, and other guns. We woke up and didn't know what was happening. They pushed their guns through the windows of the barracks and opened fire. The noise of the gunfire was deafening. Prisoners who left the barracks were gunned down. As a result of this criminal... I'm sorry. Later, it was estimated more than 600 people were killed and wounded that day.
Six of the rebel leaders were executed. But Khrushchev quickly realized the need for urgent reform. Mamchur was released, along with thousands of others impatient for a new era.
These uprisings start because of unfulfilled promises by the state. If prisoners read newspapers and see that the country is being reformed, they want these political reforms to apply to them. The suppression of the Kengir uprising was cruel, but the regime was beginning to change.
Khrushchev was bringing a lighter touch to domestic policy, but on the world stage, he was highly confrontational. The Cold War reached its height in 1962, when the world was brought closer than ever to total destruction. Ironically, it was the KGB which would help pull it back from the brink. Nikita Khrushchev knew from his spies that America had secretly deployed nuclear weapons on mainland Europe, directly targeting the Soviet Union. Khrushchev met threat with counter-threat in America's backyard.
The Soviets placed their missiles on the Cuban territory, and in the United States they learned about it.
In a story untold until today, a chance meeting between a KGB agent and a young woman alerted Moscow that America was onto them.
I was in some way involved in that Cuban Missile Crisis.
He was a radio correspondent in New York at the time. That was his cover.
I bumped into a young lady and I invited her to have a drink, and then she told me that she has a lover. He's a US Air Force reconnaissance pilot. He's now on a flight to Cuba. I said, oh, really? Could you give me his schedule so we'll beat in the beat? I mean, while he's flying, we'll get together. She said, okay. And she provided me with the schedule. So that was simple intelligence operation.
Kalugin reported immediately to Moscow Center. Kennedy mounted a naval blockade of Cuba and went public, warning the Soviets that if any rocket was fired from Cuba, US strikes would be swift and certain.
Khrushchev knew exactly the chain reaction a first atomic strike would set in motion. He knew that 2,400 targets in the Soviet Union would be wiped out.
The world watched with growing alarm as the two great superpowers squared up for a fight.
For the first time in my life, I thought maybe tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, there'll be a major, nuclear attack, mutual, and we will all die.
At the height of the crisis, the KGB's most important agent in Washington, Alexander Feklissov, set up a secret communications channel between the White House and Moscow Center.
Kennedy has filtered through this source a compromise agreement where they offer an honorable stand down for the Soviet Union to remove the nuclear weapons, and the Americans guarantee that they will not invade Cuba.
Kennedy also agreed to withdraw American nuclear missiles from Turkey. With time running out and both sides arming their warheads, Feklissov raced back to the Soviet embassy in Washington to send news of the offer from a secret communications room in the basement. Moscow accepted Kennedy's terms. Nuclear war was narrowly averted.
The KGB played a crucial role during the crisis because these intelligence channels were extremely important in enabling Khrushchev and Kennedy to reach an understanding.
Alexander Feklissov lies in a Moscow cemetery. Few who pass by will know that he played a vital role in saving the world from nuclear war. The Soviets had achieved stalemate with America because their network of foreign spies helped arm them and kept them informed. The Cambridge 5 moles had all risen through the ranks of the British Civil Service. One of them, Kim Philby, was by now Chief of British Intelligence in America. He was actually training recruits to be deployed in Moscow, only to betray them, leading to their inevitable execution. It simply didn't occur to his bosses in London that one of their own kind could ever be a spy.
Philby's membership of the establishment, its clubs, the right schools, the right institutions, his family background, he was one of us. This was key to his hiding in plain sight. People also couldn't believe that he would be a spy because it was so audacious. He had a well-recorded past as a communist sympathizer. He was so open about his previous flirtation with communism that people didn't think it was possible.
When 2 of the 5 were at risk of exposure, Philby was able to warn them, and they defected to Moscow. When he fell under suspicion himself, he displayed extraordinary bravado, holding a press conference in his mother's London home.
The last time I spoke to a communist, knowing that he was a communist, was sometime in 1934.
A sheen of sweat is quite visible on his face. He keeps using his tongue to lick his back teeth. Any student of body language could see this was a man squirming and lying, and yet at the same time, the accent, the smile, the charm were all on full display.
Philby was not a traitor, of course. He was an inspiration, a hero. He was informing us a lot.
Mikhail Lyubimov, a KGB colonel and spy master, knew Kim Philby well.
Philby was a very nice man. He was a dedicated old-time communist, completely different from the communists who were in the Soviet Union.
Philby failed to cast off suspicion, and in 1963, after a tip-off that he was about to be arrested, he fled to Moscow. But he'd been too used to the high life in the West. Now he was in for a shock. For him, life in Soviet Russia was mundane.
First time I met Philby, he was drunk. And unfortunately, that was his problem. But he had nothing to do else, and he would drink and reminiscence about the old days.
Luckily, former KGB General Oleg Kalugin understood what Philby was going through. He'd spent almost a decade himself spying in America. When Kalugin became head of counterintelligence in Moscow, he had to find ways to keep his most illustrious spy on side.
I made several arrangements for him.
Among those arrangements, Kalugin organized soirees to overcome Philby's loneliness. Young Russian women were introduced.
Of course, some of the ladies would be instructed to get in touch with him. That really made him back to life again.
Once again enjoying his private life, Philby would go on to serve the KGB as a trainer.
I must thank you personally all for your very noisy and for warm reception.
As late as 1981, he was filmed briefing the East German secret police, the Stasi, on his penetration of British intelligence.
It was made perfectly clear to me that the best target in the eyes of Moscow would be the British Secret Service. It wasn't the only target, but it was the most important one to aim at.
He coolly outlines the routine tradecraft delivering classified documents to his Soviet handler.
And take the files back early in the morning and put them back in their place.
But the valuable Cambridge network was now history. It would be 20 years before Moscow had another source the same caliber as Kim Philby. Soviet intelligence had its fair share of high-stakes drama, but espionage sometimes drifts into farce. Colonel Mikhail Lyubimov recalls a seduction that didn't quite go to plan.
The American girl who was considered to be a CIA girl, and I was put to live in the wonderful posh hotel in Moscow where she stayed too.
A tiny camera had been concealed in the wall behind an open-backed chair. The footage would be used to blackmail the CIA operative.
And then we started making love, and quite suddenly a telephone rings, just at the peak, I would say, of this wonderful session. And my KGB man, he says, "Move the chair, put away the chair." When undressing me, I put all my clothes on the chair, and the chair just closed the view of this wonderful scene.
The moment was lost, and the woman escaped the trap. If KGB agents themselves were compromised, they'd been taught how to deal with it.
I taught my subordinates that if they are in trouble or in a situation when they are confronted with some documents or pictures, tell the guys that, "Oh, wonderful, could you give me copies? I'll give it to my friends." Disarm them by your willingness to accept that. Don't feel scared. That's it.
Oleg Kalugin's boss at the Lubyanka, Yuri Andropov, understood better than anyone the KGB's power to exploit people's weaknesses. He had been appointed by Khrushchev's successor Leonid Brezhnev in 1967. Andropov was determined to restore the KGB to what he believed was its rightful place at the controls of Soviet society.
He understood very clearly what Khrushchev had done with the security forces. They had no authority in society. People had no respect for the service in general or its agents.
To cast the service in a better light, Andropov commissioned movies and novels featuring daring agents infiltrating Nazi high command, all for the glory of Mother Russia.
He restored the prestige of the security forces and recruited intelligent personnel.
At the same time as rebranding the service, Andropov set about reversing many of the freedoms gained under Khrushchev. He was a hardliner through and through.
Andropov believed that any element of dissent, anything, could eventually lead to something much bigger.
In 1968, Czechoslovakia, an ally of the USSR, seemed to be drifting away from Soviet-style communism. The Prague Spring gave rise to hopes for more freedom. Hardliner Andropov used agent provocateur to plant arms caches as proof of a Western-backed conspiracy, then used this as a pretext for invasion. Oleg Kalugin received a secure cable in Washington. By now, he'd risen to chief of KGB's station there. The message amounted to a diplomatic bombshell.
It said that tomorrow the troops of the Warsaw Pact will enter Czechoslovakia to crush the counter-revolutionary Western-sponsored revolt. And please inform the ambassador and prepare for potential troubles around the embassy.
The Soviet ambassador was Anatoly Dobrinin, a genial diplomat, as popular with the Americans as he was at home.
I called the ambassador and showed him the cable from Moscow. I was really risking my reputation or career. I said, "Fools." But the ambassador's reaction was totally unexpected. He said, "Idiots." That was Ambassador Dobrinin's reaction to Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia.
If the Americans had intercepted that cable, Czech history might have taken a different turn. Russian humor suggests that it wasn't only the Czechs that yearned for more liberal times.
Чех говорит, ты ворвался ко мне ночью, разогнав мое правительство. А если бы я так поступил с тобой? Советский солдат, товарищ, приходите поскорее.
In August 1968, Soviet forces crushed the reformist movement in Czechoslovakia.
The Prague Spring was really a sad event. Quite a few people were disgusted by the fact that the Soviets viewed Czechoslovakia as if it was part of the Soviet Union.
The invasion and the suppression of the reformist movement in Czechoslovakia asserted the Soviets' claim of dominance over Eastern Europe. Everything concerning the Soviet Union was now viewed through the prism of human rights.
While on one hand, the Soviets declared themselves the most just society, they did things that other countries found unacceptable. Soviet policy in relation to dissidents became the center of world attention.
In 1975, after international negotiations, the Soviet Union agreed to sign up to a diplomatic agreement called the Helsinki Accords, which included respect for human rights. Skeptic dissidents promptly founded the Helsinki Group to report to the West when the Soviets flouted the agreement. Miroslav Marinovich was among the founders. He remembers the intimidation he suffered at the hands of the KGB.
As soon as I came out from the house, the car that was standing nearby switched on the light, and I was going in the light of a car, and I immediately understood the message. You are under control already. They followed us everywhere.
When intimidation didn't stop him, Marinovich was arrested and sentenced to 7 years at Perm 36, one of the most notorious Siberian labor camps. Amongst many activists there was Semyon Gluzman.
The Czechs said, "You've got yourself a real academy here." And we replied, "Chief, we didn't buy tickets to come here." It affects you physically and mentally, but you try to preserve your human dignity. Sometimes I would tell myself, they put me in here for nothing. They have all their nuclear weapons and the whole world is afraid of them, but I'm not afraid of them.
But KGB chief Andropov applied another method of repression, more feared even than the Gulag.
One of the means he used to undermine dissidents was to lock them up, not into prisons, but into psychiatric institutions. And this was done partly from a PR point of view. Andropov cared a great deal from the very beginning to the end how it was perceived by the outside world, and wanted to tell people, look, we don't have political prisoners, we just have nutty people who, for their own, because of their own mental illness, don't appreciate the greatness of our party.
At the Serbsky Psychiatric Institute in Moscow, dissidents were diagnosed with an invented condition: sluggish schizophrenia.
Sluggish schizophrenia is certainly a very shameful episode in the history of Soviet psychiatry, as it is the psychiatrists themselves that come up with this concept in the early 1960s.
Effectively, if someone didn't believe in Soviet values, then they must be mad.
At the Institute, they knew they could even diagnose a lab rat with schizophrenia. It didn't matter to them.
Gluzman was a psychiatrist himself, and it was his denunciation of the practice that got him sent to Perm 36 in the first place. In Siberia, he was inspired by a fellow inmate to write an exposé of life for psychiatric patients. The work had to be smuggled out, one chapter at a time.
We had skilled calligraphers who wrote in tiny letters on little strips of paper, which were rolled up and then, concealed in the anal orifice.
But the writing was already on the wall for the Soviet Union. The number of dissidents was growing rapidly, and the economy was stagnating.
The Soviet state was very good at the old technologies, coal, steel, but with plastics, new chemicals, but particularly computers, the Soviet Union was falling behind the West at an astonishing rate.
The last thing they needed was to get sucked into a war they could ill afford. Neighboring Afghanistan had long been a client state of the USSR. But in 1979, internal unrest made the Afghan communist regime seem dangerously unstable. To secure their influence, the Soviets sent in the troops, with KGB units and regular forces taking on a guerrilla army on its own territory.
The Soviet leadership made the basic mistake of seeing its military superiority as the key to its success in Afghanistan. And it didn't think about the fact, though, was it willing to pay the price of a long, drawn-out war?
When the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan after 10 years of bitter war, 15,000 of their soldiers lay dead, and their economy was in tatters. But at the height of the war in 1985, a spark of hope emerged in the shape of President Mikhail Gorbachev. He introduced reform, known as perestroika.
I think the security officials were the people who understood the country the best. Actually, it's thought to have been the KGB who were the leading voices in perestroika originally, because they understood exactly how far behind the Soviet Union was and how much it needed to do to catch up with the West.
Soon after Gorbachev took power, the world suffered its greatest ever nuclear disaster. On the 26th of April 1986, Chernobyl's nuclear reactor suffered a power surge, releasing lethal radiation. Yet it was a catastrophe the KGB had tried to prevent.
We warned Moscow that this type of accident might happen. Basic building regulations were ignored. There was a shortage of cement and other essential materials. Sadly, no one took any notice.
As a consequence, the entire city of Pripyat, less than 100 kilometers from Kiev, had to be evacuated. Andrei Kohut, director of the KGB archive in Kiev, has uncovered alarming safety alerts raised by KGB agents long before the catastrophe occurred.
The KGB reported on these issues, but the Communist Party ignored them. Instead, they rushed construction to finish it before the next anniversary of the revolution. It was very typical of the whole Soviet Union to try and complete big projects before an anniversary, regardless of problems.
After the meltdown, neighboring countries quickly detected a massive radiation leak. Still, the Soviet authorities didn't warn their own population and ordered the Kiev May Day celebrations must go ahead as planned.
Everyone turned out for the parade, and by then the radiation levels were very high. Residents of Kiev didn't believe that the radiation was harmful. You can't smell it, and you don't feel any ill effects right away. Families were there with their kids. Even my little boy was there. We members of the KGB were expressly forbidden to evacuate our children. Discipline was absolute. As a military man, you had no right to refuse. No one even considered it.
18 days elapsed before President Gorbachev publicly acknowledged the disaster.
Учитывая чрезвычайный и опасный характер того, что произошло в Чернобыле, Политбюро взяло в свои руки всю организацию работы по быстрейшей ликвидации аварии, ограничению ее последствий. Огромную долю работы и ответственности взяли на свои плечи партийные, советские и хозяйственные органы Украины и Белоруссии. На сегодня 299 человек госпитализированы с диагнозом лучевой болезни разной степени тяжести. 7 из них скончались.
The true figures are wildly different. The Chernobyl Museum in Kiev commemorates the thousands affected by this entirely avoidable calamity, many of them children. Chernobyl had been a disaster for the Soviet Union. Internally, the system was failing. It seemed only a matter of time before it collapsed. But in the war of spies, the KGB had just pulled off the greatest single recruitment coup in its long history.
Something had gone terribly wrong within the U.S. intelligence community. Our sources, our assets, were being recalled to Moscow and being executed.
The KGB had a mole somewhere at the very top of the CIA. No one had a clue who he was.
The value of information he provided, tremendous. And they understood that the KGB really could do tremendous things. You know.
In line with protocol, his name was only known by a very close circle inside the KGB.
I supervised hundreds of foreign assets, and I practically did not know a single name, unless those who I recruited myself. But otherwise, I didn't know it. And if I would ask a name, there would be suspicion. Why does he want to know the name? That's suspicious. You don't have to know the name. You have to know his code name.
Codenamed Night Mover, the mole was causing immense damage, with over 20 key Soviet assets working for the Americans either imprisoned or executed. Whoever he was, FBI investigators knew he had to be stopped, and quickly.
The damage was incredible. He gave up all of our technical programs that were running against the Russians. But in addition to that, he gave up information on, for example, our satellite programs. He would get that information, pass it to the Russians. Information on acoustic programs for our submarines, he would pass that information to the Russians. Anything that he could touch, anything he could get his hands on.
Many agents fell under suspicion, but not Aldridge Ames. Since 1983, he had been senior counterintelligence officer in the CIA's Soviet division. Just like Kim Philby, he was hiding in plain sight. But unlike Philby, Ames was no political idealist.
The Russians used an English acronym to describe the motivations for any spy working for them. MICE was the word for money, ideology, compromising material, and ego. And clearly, money and ego were the prime recruiting weapons in the 1980s in the USA.
When at last he was questioned, Rick, as he was known, passed 2 polygraph tests. But his flashy lifestyle betrayed him.
All of a sudden, Rick is wearing Armani suits to work. He's driving a Jaguar. He's got, Italian leather shoes. And it just doesn't fit within a GS-13 salary.
The FBI examined Ames's life, looking for any scrap of evidence.
As unseemly as it sounds, we dug through the man's trash.
Sifting through the rubbish from Ames's suburban home in Virginia, one of the FBI team found shredded remnants of a note from Ames to his KGB handlers.
And he says, you know, guys, I think I've got something here. It was an operational message telling the KGB either you guys didn't leave a signal or I just can't see it.
Now, armed with the evidence, the FBI was closing in. In 1994, 9 years after his first contact with the KGB, Ames's car was intercepted near his home.
I grabbed his arms, put him behind his back, put the cuffs on him, told him he was under arrest for espionage. Then we took off.
Unlike most of those he betrayed, Ames's life was spared, and he is now serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole. After a lifetime battling America's enemies, Dale Spry can't hide his admiration for his old adversaries, the KGB.
I did respect them. I wanted to learn from the KGB, their tradecraft.
One lesson from the Ames case was that the KGB's most valued tradecraft tool was its people.
You may have thousands of gadgets and high technology. Humans are the ones who stand behind everything.
For 70 years, the KGB had been a loyal servant to the Communist Party. But in the post-Soviet era, the security services would need a new champion. He would arrive in the shape of a little-known agent from St. Petersburg. And under his leadership, the KGB would become more powerful than ever.